Thank you, Raphael, and namaste, everybody. Welcome to Mumbai. By the way, I got this in Mumbai tailored. This is a formal suit, and but it's casual on the inside. And I was just playing some music by a couple of friends of mine who have a group called Ma'ati Ba'ani, meaning the language of the earth, and they are a young couple who specialize in producing music using traditional ragas and tala rhythms and featuring musicians from the countryside. They go off all around India and sort of produce local musicians in the great industry of Mumbai, and I imagine they're working on film scores, but they do a kind of an Indian jazz, which I call raga time. And they're pretty upbeat, and I hosted them when they came on tour around North America, and I thought that they would be playing to a small audience. So they filled entire stadiums with the young Indian population of Canada and America. And so they're an example of how this city, Mumbai, is so lively and so full of people from all over India. It has a population now approaching about 20 million, but they just come streaming in from the countryside. And so it's very much the most cosmopolitan city of India, and unlike Delhi or Calcutta, it is blessed to be by the shore, so it gets a bit of a breeze. It isn't choking on pollution, which is one of the biggest tragedies of the modernization of India, is that it's sort of unlivable, especially up around Delhi and in the hot North India plain. But you've seen so many things on this trip that one more city with marvelous temples and markets, it reminds me of the old saying I saw more than I could remember on my trip, but I remember far more than I saw. Well, with that, I'm just going to take you through a quick view of where and how Mumbai, this great city, grew up on the shores of the Arabian Sea. Now you can see the great subcontinent, and of course, Mumbai, we've come up from Sri Lanka and up the coast, Kerala, Mangalore, and right about there is where Mumbai is. It is built on a series of islands, but further inland, the mountains rise up, the Western Ghats, so that there's right outside maybe 200 to 300 kilometers, there are the peaks of these Ghats, which were traditionally a great divider between the coastal people and then the interior peoples on the Deccan Plain. There's a large midland of India that still has some forests. It still has some Aboriginal people who are not at all involved with, let's say, the cosmopolitan life that we're going to be seeing in Mumbai. But just because we're not going there, I'll just show you a few pictures of what it looks like. So this was very much impassable territory, a lot of it in ancient times. So the coastal communities were quite different than, let's say, over the hills and into the interior. There is still, of course, now there are national parks that have the last preserves for some of the endangered species, like this kind of a deer. And, of course, there are lots of monkeys around, and then there are even wild peacocks up there in the forests. And as I've told you before, as we come up this coast, this is an area that is thrashed by the winter and the summer monsoons. Now we're again in the best weather you can have to come here, because as we've seen, these sort of the monsoon clouds are coming usually in the late in the day at this time of year, but some days they just come in and thrash the whole coast. With the highest recorded rainfall in one day in the Mumbai area was almost a meter of rain. 3 feet of rain fell, and that's not untypical for all this coast up here. So it has an incredible wash of it, and people, again, like I told in Kerala, they adapt to it, and they don't seem to mind it too much. It's better than living in the North India, where the drought is the biggest problem. Well, people have been living on this coast going back into prehistoric times. They found caves with Paleolithic remains, and then a whole variety of cultures have come down through the coast, including even the Greeks came and recorded Mumbai, what they call Heptanesia, the island city of 7 islands. And just off of the main part of Mumbai, you have this one island that has the great Elephanta caves, on the island, which there's an excursion to, and that's something, a must-see do in Mumbai, just because you're getting right out of this chaotic, loud city off to a quiet island where they have carvings into the rock and temples built in that have survived for, this is built about the 12th century. These are the Ellora caves, which are further up into the hill country, and again, another site for pilgrimage and archaeological study of the origins of a lot of these Hindu carvings and sculptures. Shiva, the destroyer, Vishnu, the other god that is part of the creator of, along with Brahma, the creator of the universe, and then the consorts of Padmapani and Krishna and his consort Parvati, who is sort of the love couple of Indian mythology. So this was a very, let's say, elaborate world of religion, spirituality, the visual arts, poetry, music, things like this. When India was at its golden era, which many Indians will tell you, under the different Maharajas and local sultans, and then the Mughal Empire, this area was part of the Rashtrakuta Empire, which stretched all the way from near Delhi all the way down near Kerala. And so there's an echo of this when you go out into some of further India. You will come across palaces with the Maharajas still there. This fellow looks a little bemused by his pet cats. And as I said, I once visited a Maharaja in his grand palace with an immense structure, but he had to have nets all over the main rooms because there were so many bats trying to move into the palace. He just didn't have enough people to fill up his own palace. A problem we all have at home, I'm sure. But the Mughal Empire was actually Muslim, and they came from what is now Pakistan, and they conquered almost all of India and set up that era when there was a great deal of trade with the Mediterranean and then Europe. And for instance, the United Kingdom was allied with the Mughal Empire against the French at the time, and Captain Kidd, the pirate from New York, did the great crime of pirating a Mughal ship and capturing some of the princesses and jewels on their way to Mecca. And that was what did in his career. This time in India had a small population compared to now. Again, back in the beginning of the 20th century, there were only about 200 million people in India. And you can imagine when there was even less, and there was a great deal of wilderness and wildlife, it was quite a different place than what we will run into, especially in a big city like Mumbai. So this is the Mughal flag and one of the early maps of its territories, which were, of course, vast and varied with many different peoples and, again, many different languages. Our guide yesterday teased us with how many spoken languages are there in India, and there are some 2,000 of them. And even in Mumbai, you have hundreds of languages because you have people from all over India that come here. And again, Hindi is the national language, but not that many people speak it in the south and in the far east of India, and so English becomes the default language. And even during the Mughal times, they started learning English just so they could do commerce with the world. They had also had the Portuguese there. But the Mughals were particularly important because they built these great architecture in North India. This is in Lahore, in what's now Pakistan. If you're going to Agra, you can see the fort, the Red Fort in Delhi. These are the great monuments of that era, which are in good condition. They were well built and have been preserved. Now they're national treasures. There's not that much of this kind of historic architecture in Mumbai. But this is just the background for the city because Mumbai grew up as a trading outlet for the great Mughal Empire under the region of what they call the Gujarati Sultanate, which was the immediate rulers of this area. But these are some of the miniatures of the life in those days. And so that's a look at the past, which is still present in many ways. Now this is the great King Akbar who was again a Muslim and a great king of his part of most of India. But he was most famous for becoming a music student of the great singer Tansen. And this, in musical studies in India, this is sort of a crucial figure, because Tansen was a yogi, a holy man sadhu, and a singer, and they said he could change the weather by singing, and he could also make people either weep or dance, just depending on his raga and his ability to communicate. So that's the tradition that comes down today with my friends who were ahead playing just before I started here. The Mughals also made that most of parts of India, particularly up on the border now with Pakistan, became Muslim. And there are Muslim communities all the way through, even down into Sri Lanka. And other religions go on. You saw the Jain temples yesterday in Mangalore. This is the Sikh temple, the main golden temple at Amritsar, up again in North India. And most famously, the construction of the great Taj Mahal was done as a gift to the wife of the great Akbar. This is a monument, mosque that is in Mumbai, out on one of the little islands, and you can get there at low tide. It was built 1431 in honor of a Muslim saint called Haji Ali. So that's a site just as we will be coming into Mumbai, or go see it on the tour. The Portuguese came and they took a few of the islands as a trading post. They battled with the local sultans, actually bombarded even Elephanta Cave at one point, damaged it somewhat. But this was a remaining fort from the Portuguese time. Then the British and then the Dutch came in and were competing for access to this valuable harbor, because it has a series of islands that has a lot of sheltered waters behind them in the monsoon season. So this was when the British first came in, and in the contest with the European powers, the British finally made an agreement to make peace with the Portuguese, and in 1661, Bombay as a port and its fortifications were given to Britain as a dowry for the wedding of Charles II to the Princess Queen Braganza of Portugal. By the way, her legacy goes on in the county in New York City called Queens County is named after Queen Braganza of Charles II. So Bombay became a gift, and then an alliance between the Portuguese and the British, which remains somewhat to this day. Then the East India Company leased the islands for £10 a year as their major port, so that they could bring the various spices and jewels and all of the trade goods that they would take out of India, fabrics and things like this. So here's Bombay at that time, and then this was the way the princely states under the Mughals were arrayed. And this is a complicated history. Perhaps Sir Arthur Burns can tell you more about how the East India Company ended up infiltrating the society to the point where first of all, they made commerce and roads and finally railroads, but they had resistance or rebellions all the time in various parts of India. This is the Battle of Firozek in 1845 in the North Indian Plain, where yet another of the local powers were subdued in the name of the Raj. So by 1931, this was the map of India with the British rule, and then princely states who were, let's say, subordinate, if independent, in their own territory, and then other French and Portuguese colonies. Goa was Portuguese, Pondicherry was French, but most of it became indelibly English. And then in 1868, this grand pavilion was built for the visit of the new Queen, Victoria, when she was crowned the Empress of India. And so this is a history that, if you haven't seen this film of Victoria and Abdul about the teacher from India that came to be a friend of the great Queen and came to some, let's say, household trouble and was then expelled out of England. But that's a very poignant film of that particular time. And of course, Queen Victoria is remembered by so many monuments all over Asia, and especially in Mumbai, where she came to visit. This great gate of India that was built and opened in 1924 for the visit of King George V and Queen Mary. So this was not here when Queen Victoria came. But that whole period of the Raj left Mumbai with this great architectural legacy of these grand buildings, some of which are as grand as any place in the world of this kind of architecture, a Victorian Indian blend, where they are now all preserved well and cared for, still used. This is the great clock tower at the University of Mumbai. And this is the great train station, which has been renamed the Shivaji Terminal, but that's a very busy big train terminus that goes out all over, the rail lines extend all over India. But in itself, it's a sort of a palatial construction. And there's many more, the High Court, the Prince of Wales Museum, some other academic buildings, the Asiatic Society, and the Indian population both benefited from the Raj, but they also had a lot of resistance, not just the initial contacts and battles, but the idea that India should be united and democratic and independent country was promulgated right out of the neighborhoods of Mumbai. It became a major textile production center, particularly during the American Civil War, when all cotton supplies from the American South were cut off, and that meant that the Indian supplies became much more important. Therefore, there were a lot of mills and factories built in Mumbai. Hundreds of thousands of workers were brought in, and this led to labor movement and agitation, and this is the founding meeting of the National Congress Party, which became the ruling party of India in independence and up till just recently. So you know these gentlemen, and you've maybe seen the film Gandhi, which expresses again this period of history so poignantly of Nehru and Gandhi trying to, through peaceful means, create an independent India, which was finally granted in 1948 with this flag. The great tragedy, though, is there was so much sectarianism and religious animosity that India back then and to this day has a sort of centrifugal way of local people wanting to be more free than they can possibly be. This is a monument in central Mumbai, which is to the martyrs of the Maharashtra people who were resisting the rule of the British and then resisting the rule of Delhi. And this part of India is, again, it's its own distinct state with its own language and its own economy that is now part of Greater India. Well, you know this problem in 1947 when the independence came and then the partition came. This was sort of a painful divorce between the extended subcontinent where the Muslims moved to more Muslim territories, the Hindus moved to more Hindu territories, and this led to the conflict with Pakistan, which is unresolved to this day, the dispute over Kashmir, the separation of Bangladesh from West Pakistan, and all of the troubles that have happened over time. So, but today, India is, let's say, settled as a nation, even though there's always, again, separatists. Almost anywhere you go, there are people that do not like the federal government, which is a normal state of a large nation. So now you have all these different states and other territories going all the way up into the high mountains and all the way down to islands in the in the various parts of the Indian Ocean. Sometimes we stop there in the Nicobar Islands or else in the Lakshadweep Islands over here. It's sort of like the Maldives or just many atolls. By the way, that's an Indian word, atoll. And then you have this tremendous population boom, which is now a billion, 1.2, we don't know how many. And I read a tale of a teacher in an Indian school was describing the population explosion of India and said every 10 seconds a woman gives birth in India. And a kid who wasn't paying attention very well looked at him and asked, then why did it take my mother so long? Well, this is a very tumultuous political scene, which we'll hear more about this afternoon, with many parties, promotion of voting, trying to enfranchise the poorest and the farthest of all these communities, and then, of course, a lot of, let's say, free press and free assembly and all those things that make for an unsettled society and good controversy. So this is, much of this comes right out of Mumbai and goes into the national media, which is mostly based in Mumbai and also Delhi, the capital. But between these big cities is this tremendous population, and so that's the real challenge of democracy in India, is how do you enfranchise and even get people interested to participate when they're living a subsistence life out there in the far countryside. And a lot of the legalisms or the political questions of the day have very little to do with what is often a very difficult life out there in the far reaches of India. But the central government and the state governments are making a great deal of, let's say, development to try to improve the lives of the people. This is in Maharashtra, straight up near the Ghats, where they have a lot of hydroelectric projects, just so that Mumbai will always have enough electricity and also water supply for this tremendous population. And this is the state of Maharashtra. And this, again, stretches all the way up into the Deccan Plain. It's, a lot of the states of India, they have disputes between themselves, where is the border? And so a lot of times these decisions were finally a compromise made in Delhi, where they could, let's say, establish a regular law and order out here in the tumult of all the peoples of India. Another thing that they've been developing is a modern road system, so that India will be unified and accessible by modern highways. So this is the great trunk road, they call it, all the way down to, from Delhi down to Mumbai to Bangalore, Madras up to Calcutta, so that, like in the development of China, these roads are now making a lot of places more accessible. There already is an extensive train system, but it's usually overloaded and slow. And it's also very dangerous out there, either on train or the roads, because, again, you have a lot of people that are in the way, and there have been riots over widening and building roads in places because it takes land away from people who have no other alternative. And then there are roadblocks, or I think that's called a speed bump. And just yesterday I took this picture of a truck at the cashew factory who has the permit to drive all over India. So this is an example of sort of the Federation of India needs to regulation. And so now there's a whole culture of long-distance truckers, just like in North America. And but it all comes back down to Bombay here, Mumbai. Now the name is an interesting story because, as I said, it had a name in Greek going back to the Ptolemaic time because of the trade in ancient times to here. Then the Portuguese called it the beautiful bay, or the good bay, Bombay. And then the English took that name as Bombay. But Mumbai in 1996 became the official name because of the state of Maharashtra. They wanted a local name. The local people, before all these development came in, always called it Mumbai after Mumba Devi, who was the patron goddess of Mumbai, who was said to have wrestled a sea monster to protect the fishermen on the islands here back in prehistory. And so that is the name Mumbai. And these are the islands before they were all developed into the modern city. Particularly in the 1850s, there was a British project to landfill, make bridges, and connect all of these different islands so that the city would be enlarged and could grow, and to the point where it is right now that it has now essentially a peninsula. There are a few little islands left out there, but it is a causeway and a spreading city all the way around, especially in the western suburbs to the right of the map there. That's where the bulk of the population lives. Now this is not unlike, let's say, New York City with an island in the center and then extensive development all around it. And most of the population cannot afford to live in the central city. It's almost all commercial offices, warehouses. Our shipping terminal where we'll be is on the bottom of this portrait, and that is not within walking distance of the center city. It's about a $10 cab ride to get into town, and it's a secure port, so it's not that easy to just come and go there, but there's a line of taxis out there ready for you if you're going out on your own. And this is the center city, the suburban districts, and this has spread the city all the way out into what was far countryside. When I first came in the 1970s, we rented a house up in Juku Beach area, which was a far piece away from central Bombay at the time, and now that has all developed into a whole new neighborhood. So there's one area after the other has become developed, but we will be mostly downtown on what's the Marine Drive, and the better hotels and the shopping are all in the sort of central area. This is what it looks like in the day. And again, because it's on the shore, there's usually a good evening breeze, and so the city is cleaner and more pleasant than anywhere on the interior. This is off of the Gate of India, the kind of boat traffic that takes people around the city, and then the great Chowpatty Beach stretches on the Marine Drive. Now this is a vast beach with thousands of people all the time, but the water quality is such that they don't let anybody go for a swim anymore. And like much of the world, there's too much pollution and too much plastic, but it's a relief to just go down onto the beach and get the sea breeze. Now here's the view of the Gate of India again, and also there's the Taj Mahal and its new high-rise. And again, all the boats that gather around there. And that's where the boats go out to Elephanta Island. And again, this great ceremonial tower is now the symbol of the city that dates, of course, from the previous era. And again, the mosque out on the island, which you can go out and visit. In 2008, there was a terrible terrorist attack, you may remember, on the Taj Hotel, this grand, elegant Victorian-style hotel where 179 people were killed in the assault, and then the taking back of the hotel and the fire. So that's a tragedy that is still very much felt here, and that's why there's so much armed security in where we've been so far, and also especially in Mumbai. There have been bombings in the subways and all kinds of spot terrorism and gang fighting, and I mean Mumbai has an underbelly of violence to it. Though they don't bother foreigners, I must say. We don't need to be afraid of any of that. It's just occasionally there are things that happen like that. They blame the Pakistani intelligence services for that attack on the Taj Hotel. And then not too far away is this great Crawford Market, which built in 1871 and has part of its design was done by Rudyard Kipling's father, who was an official here in the Indian Civil Service. And that is a rather tumbling market with all kinds of goods, and it's very crowded and very hot inside, but it's worth a little look at it in case you haven't had enough markets yet. And then there's just the traffic alone in Mumbai. It's just constant. And so if you haven't had enough jostling in a crowd, you get ready for more. And then there are but you can get around town, all these Padini taxi cab, sort of the icon of the area. And then the question is, why did the holy man cross the road? To prove that the traffic is just an illusion. Well, and then this sort of sight will come along. In the middle of there, this happens to be a bullock cart with a political party campaigning for something. And these poor cows are privileged, but they're stuck in traffic. And another story here is with two cows along the side started talking to each other, and one said, "Why do the humans think we're so holy and treat us so well?" And the other one said, "Well, it's because they think we are manifestations of the great creator Brahman, as in the Brahma bull. But by the way, don't let them know that we can speak, because it'll blow our good deal. So shut your mouth and chew your cud." Well, then in the city there's all this modernization. There's also ancient temples. This is the city temple for the the goddess of the city, Mumbai Devi, that dates from 1675. And so then in the middle of all this traffic, you'll end up with this temple gates and sellers of offerings, the flowers, and then you'll go in, you can see the adornment on different images. This again is the elephant god Ganesh with its protecting cat. And you can go in, like we did yesterday, in a number of these Hindu temples, and it's sort of a phantasmagoria of imagery and symbolic sculptures, and then the people actively praying. And so the religious faith is a great depth of India and sort of a refuge from all of the busyness and chaos of the outside of these sacred spaces. This is one of the many mosques that are in Mumbai. And so the people are varied. As I said, people come from all over India to come and make a living or visit. So you get quite a slice of life from the very poorest to the richest. They say that Mumbai has more billionaires and rich people than all of the rest of India combined, because you can live in your modern condo up on the top in the fresh air, but then you have, in the base, you'll have the common people and many poor people and beggars, so you get the full range of it. There is one place right in the center of the city, which is a preserved neighborhood called Kachakawadi, which is an old Portuguese and then a British houses outside of the city. These old bungalows have now been declared a national historic district, and maybe your tour will take you there into some of these, let's say, spacious houses that have no air conditioning. They just have high ceilings and fans. And this one in particular is a sari shop, so that's a fitting and garment couture business in it. Then as you go out of the city, you start running into the terrible slums. And this is also a place where all the washing is done by what they call the dobiwala, the laundry services, and other trades that are servicing those who can afford them in the city, including there's a whole leather tanning district, which is quite pungent and polluting, unfortunately, but that's a kind of a caste system where if you were born into that area and if you don't escape it, then you end up with the same labor as your father and mother, and it's very hard to ever get out of these slum areas. The most infamous is Dhavari, which is to the north of central Bombay, and this again has 1 million or 2 people living in self-made shacks. It's not unlike favelas in Brazil or other urban clusters of poor people that have come to make a living. This is most famously featured in the movie Slum Dog Millionaires, where kids, instead of doing their trade, they get their education or their opportunity, and then they hope to be a movie star. And that, of course, is a 1 in a million chance for most of these families. But both the Bombay and the Maharashtra government, the central government, have been trying to make sure that kids like this will at least get an education, not end up homeless and destitute, though it's almost inevitable with the amount of people, and especially to try to teach young girls literacy and trade, and enter the modern global economy and not be kept in a level of poverty which is so common through other parts of India. So one of the things they do for the women is they have microloans. They have banks that are just for women to get enough money to begin their business or have some extra education. And so this is making a difference for the ordinary people, so that they are now aspiring to a middle-class lifestyle, and above all get away from those terrible slums. There's a population in Mumbai that is particularly unique. It's called the Parsi. And they are originally from Persia, and when Persia, Iran became Islamic, they were persecuted, banned, and finally they fled to live in India. And there's some in other parts of the Middle East, but they are one of the people that have held on to what's called the oldest religion on earth in the Middle East, particularly because it dates from pre-Babylonian times, and it follows the teachings of Zoroaster. It's called Zoroastrianism. And so they are very disciplined, now very educated and very prosperous. And they follow Zoroaster, who was a prophet, and they call him the wise man, who, among other teachings, he believed in the dichotomy between good and evil and the requirement for religious devotion so that you may have some form of salvation. And Zoroaster's original teachings became a basis for Judaism and Christianity, and especially the halo around the head, it dates from Zoroaster. Now this is unusual because in Bombay, they are only 60,000 people, but they have their own schools, their own temples, and they have thrived in commerce and in finance, so some of them are among the wealthiest people in Bombay. I went to visit some of them who were living in their own personal palaces amidst the rest of India and Bombay crowd. But this is one of their temples that you can pass by, but you cannot go in because they continue to have as the center of their temple a living fire that dates from the time of Zoroaster. So this fire has been burning for 2,500 years or more. And when I first came here, I learned about it, and I was friends with a few of the Parsi, they're called. And then it so happened that in my rural village in upstate New York, the Parsi community in the nation and in our neighborhood built a temple just like this in what was formerly cornfields, and then they brought the holy fire on a special chartered plane from India, a live fire in an airplane all the way to New York, and then they carried it in a police escort to have the continued tradition of the fire of spirituality. But they don't let anybody into, it's a closed religion. You have to be born into it. They don't do any missionizing or converting or anything like that. But most famously in Mumbai, they had their Temple of Silence, which was a temple up on a hill overlooking the bay, far away from the city back when it was built. And it was a funereal function where the deceased would be prepared, anointed, and then put out in the middle of this temple, out of the sight of anybody else, and the priests would call down vultures, which would devour the body and fly away with it, what they call a sky burial. Now this became sort of it was objected to by many of the Marasti people, or the other common people, or the Hindus thought that this was not the way to do it, and so it has actually been stopped. They don't do it anymore, especially because the vultures that they would call down have now become almost extinct because of agricultural pesticides. So there are no more vultures either, and they've stopped that practice. But this is just one of the variety of humanity that is in Bombay, and meanwhile the city has a whole new look to it, and let's say some unusual new customs. This is now the largest private residence, a 27-story house for just one family. Mr. Marinda Abani is his name, and he is the CEO of the largest insurance company in all of India. So he has his own heliport and his own gym and has all that. So that's an example of the wealth that concentrates in Mumbai. And it trickles down. There's a great growing middle class now here and around India. And so now you have this kind of urban blocks that are built that have much better accommodations for people. And as you go out, then you have suburban-style lawns and driveways and kids playing in the street, which is quite a contrast to the Devati slums. So this is where modern India is. It's aspiring to let's say, a level of comfort and education and employment that would be unimagined just a few generations ago. And also it tends to be becoming more international, let's say. So the fellow playing the guitar, he probably thinks he's going to be a country western singer. But curiously, the guitar originally came from Persia. So it's gone around the world and has come back. And most famously is the Bollywood productions, of which Mumbai produces more films than any other place on earth. They're constantly churning them out every day. And even in Cochin, we walked through a film set. We just saw them filming, and they said, "Oh, go be an extra." We walked through, and now maybe I'm going to be a star. Well, I think they only shot the back of my head. But these are often criticized as being just, let's say, shallow entertainment. There's a love story and a song and a dance and a bad guy and a happy ending and all this. But some of them are more interesting, depending on if you can follow the languages, because there's a lot of chatter and a lot of intrigue, a lot of humor. It's very hard to understand it, even in translation. So there's buddy movies and all kinds of, let's say, the usual fare, especially the singing and the dancing in unison. That's the big thing. If you've seen the Marigold Hotel series, that's a good example of it. But there's one unusual movie that was sent to the Academy Awards for the foreign film category called Newton. And as Rick Staling, our film expert, called it, it's a fish out of water movie. It's about a man from Mumbai who is a government election official that goes up into the highlands to go to contact some of the mountain people who they want to enfranchise with the vote. But they're fighting Maoist and guerrillas, criminal gangs, and this guy, as an election official, has to get dressed in military uniform just to be safe enough to go up into the mountains. And the premise of the film is that it's sort of bearing the difficulty of democracy, and how do people get along, and how do you, let's say, share the modernization of India with the poorest and farthest away of people. But we'll see all this in Mumbai, the big new towers rising alongside the University Clock Tower. The world's biggest cricket stadium is here, just up above the central town center. A lot of other new architecture. This is the Changir Art Gallery of modern art, of Indian art. And then the Nehru Center, which is a conference hall named after, of course, the first president of India. And then many of us will go through the great new airport, which is well outside the Shivaji airport. And things like the new stock exchange. And so this is an example where India is reaching into the future and trying to make its city and country work with new high-speed rail lines and subways and new roads and bridges. And so they're investing a great deal in their infrastructure, unlike some countries. And this is the great new Bandra bridge to the north suburb. And so this is an example of how much they are and absolutely need to build all this, because they just have so many more people coming into town, and they want to have it as a functioning city. But in the midst of that, there's a lot of beautiful sights that sort of surprise. This is on a roundabout near Marine Drive. A lot of public art, but I found a couple of, let's say, transitory pieces of art that are chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Now, this is actually a very ancient tradition. They do this in a temple to make a beautiful design, and then when the rain comes or the wind comes, it blows away as a sort of exercise in impermanence. So you may come across these just in the downtown around there's always one near the Gate of India. And then there's a lot of life in the street, of course. We were off to a market somewhere, or lunch somewhere. We came across a wedding parade with a marching band and the whole family just dancing in the street, and had us join in, and then the parade went on. So especially in the evening, there's a lot of life out because it's finally cool somewhat. So here's the Indian youth who, in the inimitable way, they just want to go get bombed and bayed. Sorry about that. And I took a picture of this fellow as an example of just how exuberant people are. So I'm gonna try a little of this on you. How many gurus does it take to screw in a light bulb? None, because the bulb must itself become enlightened. And well, a little more modern one. How does the computer engineer know when he has reached nirvana? When there are no more software updates needed. And so You have this, let's say, tumultuous city with energetic people, and one of the things they've had as a phenomena in recent years is what they call laughing yoga, which is a relief from the day-to-day commute and strain of the city. So I'm going to invite you to practice with me. It's a form of pranayamic yoga, which concentrates on your breathing. And so if you follow with me, you breathe in with your nose and exhale slowly. And then you start to make your sounds. And all together now. Well, with that, I wish you a great trip to Mumbai. My pleasure to be with you on this trip, and have a great trip. Thank you.